my panelists, Ahmed Arif, co-founder of Clara Technologies, a legal technology startup. And Mohammed Khashoggi, the founder and CEO of Ejaro. Last but definitely not least, Rayan Alsharif, my partner at BIM Ventures. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for making it to our panel. Building or managing a startup is, by definition, dealing with uncertainty every day. If it's certain, it's definitely or most probably not innovative. Today, we're going to explore some of the ways that we can avoid or work around that uncertainty when it comes to going into not yet regulated markets. So we're not talking about regulated markets. We're not talking about finding loopholes. I'd love to start with Ahmed, as Ahmed has experience on the whole spectrum of setting up companies, working with the VCs on the legal side. Please tell us a bit about what you've faced and how you've been dealing with it in the past few years.
Sure. Thank you, Mohammed. Yeah, as you said, I think from my perspective, Clara is an interesting one because what we do kind of covers everything from definitely not regulated, SaaS services, data room, cap table, etc., to definitely regulated, corporate services, company formation, which you need a license for from a regulator, and then a little bit in the middle where you're not quite sure if it's regulated or not. The regulators are not quite sure whether it's regulated or not. In our case, that's document generation for legal contracts. Is that a legal service? Is it a software service, etc.? So I would say the most important thing is before you begin doing that mapping exercise, right? Do your research, look at what it is that you're trying to achieve, where you're trying to achieve it, because jurisdiction is important, and do the research, maybe even spend some money on advisors if you are unsure. Obviously, you don't want to spend money unnecessarily, but it will be money well spent if you think you're in that gray area. And then identify, maybe this bit of what I do might be regulated, this bit isn't, etc. And then once you've done that, you then have to come to a decision as a founder. Well, do I maybe start in the unregulated bit for my MVP? Or no, this is too core to what I do, I have to be regulated from day one. And if so, when do you speak to the regulator then becomes really important. Timing is really important. I've never met a regulator that thinks that they shouldn't be involved if you speak to them, so it happens, but it's quite rare. So just be prepared when you have that conversation. You're putting yourself on their radar. So it's kind of mapping, timing, and that key balance of asking for permission or forgiveness, basically.
Great. I think, Mohammed, with Ejaro, you have an experience where you had to start with the regulator. Definitely. Based on the field that Ejaro is in. Tell us about that experience, how you overcame some of the challenges and the uncertainties.
Definitely. Firstly, I think with our particular service, it's just like anything new. It's a gray area, right? So you would have to kind of navigate through all the loopholes, right? So for us, in specific with our services, there were no regulations whatsoever. There wasn't any type of clear direction into how and to kind of make the service regulated and available through the Ministry of Transportation specifically. But for us, it was more than one regulator. It was several. As the services that we provide to be complete, we would have to go.
For the benefit of our audience, quick brief about Ejaro.
So Ejaro is we're the first licensed peer-to-peer car sharing platform. So in short, we are the Airbnb for cars. So with the type of service we provide, there are several different entities that we have to deal with, from the Ministry of Transportation for the license to actually operate, the Saudi Central Bank for the finance products, as well as the insurance product that we've created. the Ministry of Interior for the specific integrations that we had to do in order for the car authorizations, which we have in Saudi through a platform called Abshir, to be integrated, which did not exist or does not exist. We actually created that. So there's a lot of maneuvering, and when you're walking into something new, you don't really know what lies ahead until you kind of go through it.
So from what I understand, going in, you realize that there's more than one regulator in what you're trying to do. 3?
Definitely. For us, it's about three,
Did
4.
you go head on with every regulator? What did you do to...
Head on is, for sure. We don't take no for an answer. We were very persistent in kind of, pushing to get things done. They are definitely more agile. They are definitely more lenient with the Saudi vision and the kind of where the country is heading nowadays. But it definitely did take time. Part of the strategy for jumping into something that's unregulated, you have to be prepared and kind of balance your burn and the prolong your burn rate and what you actually have coinciding going with growing your team, and there's a lot of things that you kind of have to balance.
Did partnerships play any role in?
Absolutely.
Because I'm sure if you're going head on with the transport authorities, you're going on with the central bank for the insurance, you're going on with the traffic and the police for the authorization. How could you, as an entrepreneur, a startup, go on and figure out that whole and map all those regulations, go head on?
So we kind of took the partnership approach, right? So instead of just going and trying to get a license or get something, we kind of used it as a partnership whereby it's beneficial for both, and it serves the entire market down the line.
Can I actually add something on the partnership point? The answer doesn't always have to be get your own license, right? You can also work with somebody who has a license, right? Like fintechs do that all the time. They may not necessarily have a banking license, but they partner up with a bank that does the piping in the background, so to speak, and has the license and warehouses it for them. That could be your ultimate solution, or it could be your first step until you build up, prove the business, prove the market, and have more time to finish your discussions with the regulators.
For sure, absolutely.
Rayan, as a venture builder who's always, you have a tried method of certain steps you have to build every startup, but then you find that every case has a unique uncertainty when it comes to regulation. How is it something that you can, as a venture studio who's building every day, go about navigating that?
I think for us as a co-founders, acting as a co-founders with the founder, we are it's a stakeholder management game. So the regulator is a very important stakeholder to any regulated or to be regulated business. The process of doing that, sometimes you need to go and tap into gray areas, and in order just to start your business, and then from there, the more ready you are, the better. We're talking here as a regulator. When you talk with him, you need to talk the same language with the regulator. So let's take, for example, the financial markets. If you're a fintech startup and you're talking with a financial market regulator, you need to speak his language. If not, go be ready and bring on advisors in your startup and talk the same language with the regulator, because from the regulator point of view, the most important item on his agenda is to protect the stakeholders in his market. So I think two things is very important: to understand the language of the regulator, and also to understand how to navigate and be ready from a technical point of view, from a regulation point of view, when you talk with the regulator. If the regulator saw that you are ready and you're almost there to launch and operate your business, it's a good advantage for you. The regulator will understand that you are taking this seriously, and he will start working with you to make it happen. And I think this is the tipping point in your relationship with the regulator.
And you might find out that there are regulations in place that you can adopt and play to your advantage in whatever you're trying to innovate.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that actually that's one of the pros. There are a lot of cons to being in a regulated industry, but if you're a first mover and you have those discussions with the regulators, even if there isn't a regulation to use, you're then in a position to craft those regulations with them, to influence their thinking, to present what works for you. I mean, that's just to give you a quick anecdote from my previous days as a lawyer. We were doing one of the first bank acquisitions in the UAE, Lloyd's. And there were very few, there's an ancient regulations from the 80s that nobody's ever used. And we had the discussions with the central bank, and we actually came up with a framework that just worked quite well for our deal. But there's no time to pass the law, but the central bank just issued a letter signed by the chairman. And we actually used that to transfer the banking assets down to, I remember the last asset we transferred was school debentures. That's when a company has places reserved for their staff in schools that have waiting lists. And I had to get on the phone with the headmaster of the school and explain that this letter from the chairman is basically the legal authority to transfer the asset. So you can really be there on the ground floor making things happen. And often the regulators will be very happy to have your support because they haven't thought about it yet.
I agree, because we've had the similar kind of thing happen with the transport authorities. So we basically wrote the regulations with them, and it took us some time, because when we first started, it was kind of a temporary license just to operate for a certain period of time, for about three to 4 months. But then later, when we had to kind of renew it to a full license, we then had to sit down for several workshops and go through the whole points with them on every single point for the market. It's a brand new thing. It wasn't done before, so we had to sit and do the whole thing with them. So I definitely agree with you on that.
I think there's one thing in common, even with Asil, with Ejaro, with the story you gave us, Ahmed, of not taking no for an answer, breaking glass ceilings, being very confident about what you are trying to build, showing the market first, for your clients, and the regulator that you are trying to add value to those markets that you're trying to innovate in. Okay. I think with Asil, we've had a similar, Asil as the first real estate crowd investing platform in Saudi. The Capital Market Authority were challenging in the beginning, saying no from the get-go, and then Rayan pushed back for how long was it?
14 months.
14 months?
14 memorable months.
Until we were able to come to a common ground. But the thing that happened there and with Ejaro, and I'm sure with you guys, was that there was a lot of compromises. You come in, you have a very innovative model, you want to take on the world with the model that you're building, but then you come to a realization that the quickest way is to actually tone it down a bit sometimes, take the strategic route. Let me put my foot in first, let's gain that confidence, and then try to change more from within. Tell us more, Rayan, about the experience you've had building in the money markets with the central banks and the capital markets authorities.
I think there is two. I will explain in two cases. There is the case where you need to take the regulator approval and to actually amend and change the regulations. And there is the case of starting with point 1 and going back and go to point 10 in your business model. For example, you have mentioned Asil, because it's a B2C business mainly, you need to start working with the regulator from day one to make sure there's an investor protection mechanisms inside the business, and in which pool do you fall as a business model. When we had to reach to a common ground with the regulator was basically we do understand your language as a regulator, and we have done 1 and 2 and 3 to make sure that we are in line with your regulations from investor protection point of view. So sometimes it's very important to understand the language and the background of the regulator so you can reach to that middle point where you can actually amend the regulations and make it happen as a partner with you in that sector. The second case where sometimes going to market is very key and you're trying to catch time. So instead of implementing the whole business model, you can start with a simple business model and draw that roadmap for you to reach from point A or point 1 to point 10 in your business. And this game is it's called where it's a middle ground from gray area point of view and start from there and going to amend that regulations.
Great. You know, they say hindsight is 20/20, and we all know the advantages of being a first mover, knowing all the risks and all the hurdles you guys have to go through. Would you go back and be the first mover in what you've done, or would you do something differently? I'll let you, Ahmed, start.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, there's definitely many days where I was thinking it would be just nice if I was doing something completely simple, unregulated, don't have to deal with that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But no, I still would do it. I think the main reason is it becomes an asset, right? Like having done that work, that means there's a moat around your business. It means there's going to be less competitors, right? Or you're going to have more time before competitors are able to emulate what you've done. So, I think if as long as you go into it well prepared and ready to execute on that piece of it, all that work, all that time, all that money that you might spend on advisors, that becomes an asset. I'm sure Rayan agrees, but that's actually an asset that investors also recognize when they're reviewing the company, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Ahmed.
Yeah.
Ahmed?
There's definitely a glory in being a pioneer, right? Being the first to start, but it does also have its sleepless and sleepless nights and the days that you think is, why am I doing this? Like, but for sure down the line when things start to work out and in many months ahead, it's definitely worth the headache and the trouble and just becoming like I said, the pioneer, the person that's introducing this for the first time in the region it has its own glory for sure. So I agree that that sometimes initially when you start off, you never kind of anticipate everything that's gonna happen, or gonna what's ahead of you, but you kind of tackle your way through things as you move forward, and once you reach that point, I think the reward is there for sure, definitely.
Rayan, I'm not going to ask you what would you do differently, because I know you're doing this on a daily basis. But what have you learned from doing this repeatedly? First with Amine, and then with BIM and Asil and everything that you're building on a daily basis.
That's what's beautiful about our work. It's about the journey and the people you are with. So yeah, definitely, we'll do it all over again. Because it's a stakeholder management business. You meet a lot of people with different authorities, with different domains, and as a founder or as an entrepreneur, I think that's the true definition of being a founder, where you enter a new domain and you explore that domain along with your partners.
Great. If you have anything you want to close with before we open the ground for questions?
Yeah, I mean, just a couple of things for me. So I think just to finish off on that theme of being the first mover and interacting with the regulators, another advantage is that you can actually use that to craft the product that actually works for your customers. It's actually a way to make it easier for you to sell. Mm-hmm. So, from the Clara example, one of the things we do is, set up companies and holding companies for founders. We interact and engage with ADGM regularly, for example, DIFC, other regulators, and they're super helpful, super open to it. And we tell them, these are the pain points. This is why I can't sell more of these, right? If you change 1, 2, or 3, or if you tweak this regulation or change this license requirement, this is what the market needs. And then if you succeed in getting those changes through, then it's not just about, so I don't think of it just about how you're regulated, but you're actually building the product that you're trying to sell in the market, right? And then all of a sudden those changes happen and it's a lot easier to sell ADGM, SPVs, for example. So that's, another way to think of it as kind of marketing. And the last point for me is I would say, we heard about the Ejaro experience, multiple regulators. It may be a case where you just have to deal with multiple regulators, but one thing you can think about and not be shy about is like forum shopping, right? Like if there are various options, if you can base yourself here and this regulator is a little more receptive or more engaging or the regulations work there, just do it. Take the easiest route that works for you. And that builds momentum, and then you can go to other regulators and say, well, I've done it already. This is how it's done. Yeah. This is how we should do it. So, I think you have to, like with everything in startup life, hustle a little bit and find what works for you.
No, I agree 100%. I agree 100% with that point. That was actually the case with several of them. So it's kind of, nowadays, I don't want to say it's a competition, but it's like, who can be more agile, who can help, expand on that sector, who can help, startups and new founders open up different opportunities and new segments to each sector. So I definitely agree with that point.
Build FOMO between the regulators.
Exactly. And we use that to our advantage, right? It works. It actually does work. So.
Rayan,
sure.
Anything to close with?
I think there is a say, because again, as a founder, you should be fearless and very adventurous. What's normal for the spider is chaos for the fly. So normal is basically an illusion, and you should always explore new domains and work with your stakeholders to make it happen.
Great. Thank you guys very much. We'd love to hear if anyone from our audience has any questions or want to add anything.
Yes, I'm going to come with a microphone. We have 5 minutes, so please, here you go.
Thank you. So my question is for Ahmed. So Ahmed, from what I understand, Clara caters to both startups and lawyers, correct?
Yes. So I mean, the platform is aimed to help early stage founders in a number of ways. But yes, they can basically share access with lawyers. The lawyers can use it to work with their startup clients. Yeah.
So on that standpoint, I mean, being a first mover in such a such a unique piece of technology, right? How have you found acceptance and mass utilization? Like, are people quite accepted of that? I don't even know.
I know what you mean.
But then have you also found that being regulated actually adds to the credibility of that and the mass acceptance?
Yeah, two very good points, actually. I mean, I think, being at the forefront or doing something new, there is this education element to it, right? Particularly, when you're dealing with other lawyers, they're a bit more conservative. This is new. Should my clients really be using this? So it's the stakeholder management point, right? It's not just regulators. You need to go out to all the market participants that you think are going to interact with you, with your product, with your customers, and educate them and sell them as well on it. So yeah, 100%. It's a piece of work, an ongoing piece of work. And then to your second point around, once you get that badge, absolutely, that kind of like, I have this license, it gives you instant credibility. Somebody might be like, fly-by-night cowboy that doesn't, hasn't done their homework or doing it completely offshore, cross-border, trying to enter your market. That's a very nice story for you to tell to your customers, right? And to kind of post about. It's like, we're regulated, we're here. There's somebody that's looking after your interests, not just us. Yeah.
Great.
Another question? This gentleman, you can get a microphone. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks to everyone on the panel today. It's actually another question for Ahmed. I work in a prop tech startup in Dubai. My question is, for any type of startup operating outside of a traditionally regulated market, are there any regulations that still apply and we need to watch out for?
Yeah, it's also a very good question. I think one thing that you shouldn't always think of it as like, oh, I'm a fintech, I might be financially regulated, or I'm legal tech. There might be some legal services in it. Even if you're just, let's say, SaaS or some basic consumer online product that isn't regulated, there is one thing that most people should keep in mind. There's one set of regulation that will virtually apply to every single startup, and that's data protection. There's one regulator you need to worry about, and it's mostly the EU. It's GDPR, because that's kind of the gold standard. There are others in the US, California in particular. But that's one set of regulations and regulator to always keep an eye out on, even if you're unregulated otherwise. Even if you think you're not in the EU or your customers aren't, if you're BTC, you can't control where your customers sign up from. You can't always control where your data goes. It might go through an EU server, your cloud provider, whatever. And then, as I said, it's just the gold standard. So if you set yourself up that way from day one, A, you're at the gold standard, and B, if you ever do want to expand, into the EU, in the GDPR example, then you've already done the work. Otherwise, it's going to be 10 times more complicated and expensive to try and do it later. So yeah, I would always say anybody starting in these days, always keep an eye on data protection processes and procedures.
Ahmed asked me to make a disclaimer before we started, but I forgot to do that. He's here in his capacity as a co-founder, not as a lawyer. So whatever he says is not legal advice.
It's very important. You're being a better lawyer than I am right now. Yeah. Asterisk, not legal advice. Yeah.
Yes. So let's avoid the legal advice questions if possible. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks.
We have time for one more question at least. Is there one? Well, right there.
Thank you, Eric. The question I have, in terms maybe one of the panelists can answer, it's most of the regulations are still evolving. I think because especially if fintech, for example, that there are a lot of gray areas, and so where you're stepping the line. So based on the experience you had, does it really, how stiff is the enforcement? Because when sometimes you may have, crossed the line and they were supposed to, or the intention was not there. But do you think that the experience with these regulatory authorities have been, because they are in this part of the world, I think the fines are quite heavy. So do you think that what, as a founder, you need to worry about that you're not stepping into a cross? I think there's something maybe you can just share some experience and how flexible the authorities are in terms of if you cross a line and you shouldn't be.
Yeah. I'll let Rayan or Mohammed answer, but I think it depends on what market or what regulator you're dealing with. Rayan, you have...
I think, okay, there is general rules across. First, as a founder, you should be fearless. So just do it and start your business. Okay. So the general rules, if there is a money transfer through your system, it should be regulated by the central bank. Okay. If there is an investment action, clear investment action, it should be regulated by, I think,
Money Market Authority.
Yeah, the Money Market Authority. So these two are the general rules. If it's not, now you can take it a bit level down, where we're talking about some businesses. You need to partner up. The partnership approach, I think it's a great, where you partner up with a regulated business to conduct your main business model.
One point to add, I think when it comes to fintech, for example, it's a whole different thing, and I think with anything else, it's completely different, because when it comes to specifically fintech, I think there is no going around and kind of being sorry later. So I think you have to kind of
and anything that deals with people's safety.
Yeah.
So transportation, health.
Absolutely.
So don't mess with people's health or their safety or their money.
Or their money. Yeah.
Unless you've got it at least figured out. You're not very deep in the gray area. Whether through partnerships, whether through having the right legal advice or the expertise advice. I think that's what...
that's right. And just a final point on enforcement, I would say that one of the advantages of speaking to the regulators is that you're on their radar, so they're going to be a lot more forgiving later than enforcement, because you did the right thing, you're speaking to them, right? So that's another advantage of having the conversations, even if you don't get the license, and go ahead and do it anyway, right?
All right. Thank you, Ahmed, Mohammed, and Rayan, and thank you to our lovely audience for your time and being here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.